After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
What was that topwater John Mikey was throwing over at FDR Park for them largemouth John?
Asked to see his dad's old Muskie gun. How else would you dispatch a Muskie before bringing it in the boat?
If you could fish with any Muppet, which one would it be?
The guy that lives in the trash can.
Example, where's Puck? Remember Puck from the real world? Whatever happened to Puck?
Bent! Good morning, degenerate anglers, and welcome to Bent, the fishing podcast that once got booted off an episode of MTV's Lip Service for not knowing the words to How Do You Talk to an Angel. I'm Joe Cermelli.
I'm Miles Nolte. And wasn't that like the theme song to Dawson's Creek?
No, it was not. And you know what, dude? You know it wasn't. You know that. You know that. Your little snide-ass rhetorical question there it's actually more on point than you realize, though, because the guy who sang How Do You Talk to an Angel actually did play Tori Spelling's boyfriend on Beverly Hills 90210.
Really?
How about that?
You're like a 90s media savant.
I hate that I know that, but I do.
If we ever get to play bar trivia again, I'm on your team. I'm calling dibs. We're on the same team.
You're in.
And you're right. That was a snide comment, and I was being a jerk. But to get back to where I think you were trying to lead us in this conversation, yes, I do remember MTV's Lip Service, and if memory serves, it was a cringeworthy lip-syncing competition judged by B-list celebrities. Is that right?
Exactly. And I watched that show religiously back in the day, and I feel like in that era, in the early to mid-'90s, you'd come home from school, and that was always what was on. Like if you just put on MTV in the afternoon, that's what was on. And I watched it like crazy. It was, Spinderella was the DJ.
Salt and Pepper.
From Salt and Pepper.
Yeah.
And it was the bomb because she'd throw Jane's Addiction at some sorority girl. And it was glorious because the same girl, she'd be all over that Ace of Base track, really feeling herself and grooving. But then Perry Farrell comes in and it's instant train wreck. It just falls apart. And then these poor people would have to have their performance judged by Gilbert Godfrey.
On body mechanics, Gilbert, how do they move for you?
They move well. I know about good body movement.
What'd you give them, man?
I give them a 7. They
Gave them a
move
7.
well.
That's a good score.
How deep a lip service rabbit hole did you fall to do this bit, man?
It was large and deep. It was large, and to be honest, I'm gonna tell you what, man. It wasn't even the lip service footage that took me back and tickled me most, but the commercials in the episodes I watched. Some of them had the old commercials still in there. You know what I mean? Listen to this. Do you remember Cinnaburst gum?
These dots indicate an explosive personality.
Cinnaburst with flavor crystals.
Yes.
May not be suitable for adults.
Flavor crystals.
Yes.
Oh, I had completely blocked those from my memory, I think. Or I don't know, maybe whatever toxic chemicals those were made out of are actually responsible for my lack of short-term memory. I don't know, but they definitely couldn't have been good for me.
No, probably not.
They had to be bad. This might also be a rhetorical question. What happened to that dude who hosted Lip Service?
Oh, I don't even know his name. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. It's John something, I think. I don't know.
John J. It was definitely a J word. And I mean, there's that guy. I feel like I feel like there's a whole host of 20-somethings who thought that getting on MTV was going to like jumpstart their careers.
Oh,
and
yeah.
now I have no idea what happened to them. Where's Puck? Remember Puck from the real world? Whatever happened to Puck?
Holy shit. Oh, Puck. Puck was the best.
He was terrible.
Thank you for oh my God, I forgot about Puck. Though I will say, Puck, if you're listening, like we'd love to have you on, Puck. And normally, like we say stuff like that and it's a joke because these people, it's not going to happen. These people aren't going to come on our show. But it's not outside the realm of possibility. We may actually hear from Puck because I'm assuming at this point his career as a bike messenger has dried up.
Yeah.
And Puck's probably not doing a whole lot these days.
I really hope we don't hear from him. I'll just say
Come
that.
on.
I get it. You think it would be funny. I would vote nay on Puck, and I'm not that worried about it if I'm being honest. I'm pretty sure Puck didn't take up fishing. All right.
No.
Moving on. That's probably enough 90s pop culture for one intro. Let's get into
Maybe.
let's get into our real world here. This real world. We're kicking things off this week with a badass, salty East Coast fly fishing guide who's probably too young to have caught any of those references, but that's all right. We like her anyway. In this week's Covering Water segment, we're making like the pilots in Wings, a little more for you, but instead of trying to fly to Nantucket, we're landing on Martha's Vineyard to rapid-fire idiotic questions at Captain Abbie Schuster.
I'm going in. Cover me, Porkins.
I can hold it.
Pull on!
No, I'm all right.
Joining us today, we have Massachusetts-based guide, outfitter, and shop owner, Captain Abbie Schuster. What's going on, Abbie?
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Even if you're on the wrong side of the country, I still appreciate you taking
Incorrect.
the time.
She's on my side of the country.
There you go.
Okay. The right coast, officially.
The right coast.
So as I was trying to prepare for this, like I was working on figuring out how to somehow quickly sum up the trajectory of your career, and I'm not sure if I got it right. You were born out east, and then you came to Montana for college and started guiding around Missoula.
Yep.
Then you went over and started guiding in Washington and Alaska, and
Yep.
then you went back east to start up your outfitting operation. Is that all correct?
Yep, that's right.
And is that because you finally couldn't stand not having a good piece of pizza anymore?
Actually, it is part of it.
See? Called
That
it.
is
all right.
part of it.
You're probably picking up on something that you may or may not know, and which is that Joe and I are perpetually locked in this East versus West feud, and the
It's a
fact
hard
that you
one.
went back there kind of tells me that you're on his side. So I'm holding that against you a little bit, but I'll get
It
over
took a
it.
few tries, and finally I said, I could be an East Coaster again. New Englanders are hardy people.
I'm not arguing that. I just I'm partial to Montana myself.
Part of my heart's always there.
Fair enough. I'm gonna leave that alone because we don't need to dive into that whole East West thing. I think that's been covered more than enough. Another thing I found out about you. You are the only charter captain that I know who's also a yoga instructor. All right. So just real quick, like I'm very familiar with the process of getting licensed as a captain because I've done it. But is there like a formal process for getting oneself recognized as a yoga instructor, or is it just like being a professional fly fishing guide on Instagram? Okay. So what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be, I can't just tomorrow call myself a yoga instructor.
I hope not.
I hope not either.
No offense. No, you have to do like 200 hours of school or 500 hours of school. And then you're a 200-hour teacher or 500-hour teacher. And so it's usually like mine was 9 months of like twice a month meeting for the whole weekend.
So it's harder than becoming a captain, is what you're saying.
It's longer, but
Interesting.
the tests way easier. Captain tests are hard.
They're really hard. I know.
They're hard. I was surprised how hard they were.
I could spend too much time on this, but I feel like I'm going to save my stupid questions for the actual reason you're here. We asked you onto the show today to take part in Covering Water, which is the rapid fire interview segment we do instead of bothering to conduct proper interviews. And here's how it works. Joe's going to put 2 minutes on the clock, and then he and I are going to rapid fire questions at you. Your goal is to get through as many as possible in those 2 minutes, which means you can't think about your answers. You just got to blurt out whatever comes to your head.
Okay.
All right. But in the spirit of fairness, after those 2 minutes are up, we will give you 1 minute to expand and elaborate on whichever answer you think was most interesting or potentially damaging to your career.
You pick the career ender, and you have 1 minute to.
I guess
People love this. All our guests are like, "What a great segment."
I can see why.
All right, you ready to go?
Yep.
All right. 2 minutes starts now.
Would doing more yoga make me a less shitty spaycaster?
Yes.
What's the most painful spot you've ever been hooked?
My stomach.
Ooh.
Your least favorite fish to target?
Sea robin.
Ah, interesting one. Which beer is honestly, truly better, Bad Martha or Cisco?
Cisco.
Whoa, that's the Nantucket beer. Go ahead.
I know, that's bad. I should explain that one.
Rocky Mountain oysters or whole belly clams?
Whole belly clams.
What gets you more excited, the worm hatch or the squid run?
Squid.
Oh.
Which fish are stupider? Stripers busting a bait pile or cutthroats chowing on caddis?
Cutthroat.
The Cape Cod Canal. I love it or screw that shit show?
Screw that shit show.
Nice. Thank you.
Who's the greatest angler of all time?
Oh. My grandmother is pretty good.
Ah, that's a great
Excellent.
answer.
Great answer.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
The best fish to sight cast to in the entire world is?
Striped bass.
Okay.
Iyengar or vinyasa?
Wow. Vinyasa.
I don't even know. I don't have anything there. The movie you quote most often is?
I'm really bad at quoting movies.
Okay.
So not really.
The species you've never caught that's highest on your list?
Peacock bass.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, should
Clouds
be.
or minnows? Chartreuse over white or pink over white if you could only use one for the rest of your life?
Pink. Favorite color.
Excellent.
Poppers or stick baits?
Poppers.
If you could fish with any Muppet, which one would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. Maybe the guy that lives in the trash can. Is that a Muppet?
No, that's Oscar.
That's
We're out
Sesame
of
Street.
time, but that's...
But he's a great color. He's a perfect color for it.
We'll have to get clarification on whether Oscar the Grouch is a Muppet. I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
He looks like one.
That was a fun one. All right.
That was.
So I am now putting 1 minute on the clock, and you can elaborate, Abbie, on any one of those answers that you would like. Your time starts now.
Okay. The beer question, I feel like I have to go back to that because we have this little rival between, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. I like Bad Martha's. It's, my people. But I just like the taste of Cisco better, I have to say. I really do.
Man, you picked the one that is like saving your local street cred. I appreciate
Literally,
that.
though, the shop would not run another year. And we're right down the road. So I have to protect my back here.
Oh, man.
I wish I had anything to say about this because I don't know either of those beers or anything about this
If
particular
we ever
rivalry. But
fish
it
together,
seems like
I'll
it's heated.
bring both.
Seems like it's heated.
And look, full disclosure, when I was coming up with questions, I wanted to come up with some fun ones. So I reached out to a buddy of mine who's up there, works for On the Water, and I was like, dude, what's a good beer question for Abbie? And he's like, she's on the Vineyard, right? And he's like, yeah, so Bad Martha or Cisco, that's the two rival beers.
Yeah, they do. The island's rival. You should see it. It's crazy.
I've never been to Nantucket, only Martha's Vineyard, but that was for a Jaws tour, sadly, not to fish. And that's dorky, and I'm sorry I said it, but that's what I've been there for.
I've only been to Nantucket two. I fish around there all the time, but actually step foot on the island twice in my life.
Yet they have the better local brew.
Yeah, I know. I get to stop in, get a beer, hang out.
I feel like we've thrown a regional gauntlet here on Bent, and this will only be settled with the fishing throwdown. Hopefully, Joe can get up there and do that and help you out with that. Abbie, thanks for coming. We really appreciate having you.
Thank you so much.
I'll tell you what, man, I got such a kick out of Abbie using her 1 minute of clarification time to explain why the rival island's microbrew is better than her island's microbrew.
Yes.
Like, that
Good
was
choice.
gutsy if you think about it.
Mhm.
Like, to just, she just went for it and was honest. But I admire her honesty so much, and I hope nobody's, like burning cases of Cisco on the steps at the shop right now. So I feel terrible.
I hope that's not the case either. I'm gonna think better of humanity and guess everyone took it in stride. And I think that's part of why I and other people like Abbie. She's straight up, man. She calls it like she sees it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know anything about that fishery out there, so I don't know what you guys were talking about with the Cape Cod Canal. But after she outed it as a shit show, I want to know more. I'm interested.
Yeah. We could spend hours picking that apart. And for the record, I've never actually fished there, but I want to because I enjoy a good shit show. Sometimes it's just part of the Northeast scene. But basically, it's shoulder-to-shoulder dudes in season. And like many places in the Northeast, it gets crowded. And some people consider catching a big striper there kind of half a victory, because it's real easy access. And the fish are kind of corralled, and somebody with relatively little knowledge can stick a 40-pounder there, just like walk up in sweatpants and do it. But then it's that argument of does that fish count as much as the 40, a guy caught by putting on a wetsuit and swimming to a rock in the middle of the night after months of noting the tides and following the migration. So it's kind of viewed as like the easy place to get your big bass, but I still want to fish there. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think I can weigh on that if we're talking about big trout in a spring creek versus land of the giants out here. I could talk about that, but I don't know. If you're asking me the question, does that count? I don't know. I think the guy doing the crazy stuff in the middle of the night counts more. I would pick that one as more valid. I definitely. I mean, in my youth around here, I almost killed myself a couple times just trying to catch 20-inch trout. I have no idea what I would have done if I had access to 40-pound stripers. Like, I don't know. I would have done something even
trout
stupider.
Fishing, like I did for a time when I discovered stripers.
Yeah. And like in the past, when we've been swapping fishing stories, you've told me about folks who get like fully suited up in heavy wetsuits and swim rough seas at night to deep water rocks. And they tow all their gear behind them, right?
Yeah,
just
or
to
they
get
have
a
just
shot.
waterproof stuff. Like that's what all those van stalls are for. They're waterproof. They just lash it to themselves and kick backwards. Man, none for me, thanks. But I know the guys who do this.
I'm intrigued by that. That is one of, and we can add it to a whole list of things in the Northeast that I just don't know much about. But I want to know more about it. Like I'm interested in that. Yeah. And as we do so often, we get on these topics about Western stuff and Northeastern stuff. And by my request this week, Joe is going to teach us a lot more about a very niche Northeast word with hip hop roots in the weekly word.
Webster's dictionary defines fish as...
This week's word is Jawn. That's Jawn. And it's a word that really has nothing to do with fishing, but at the same time could technically have everything to do with fishing. And the only reason I'm even doing this, John, is because I said the word John in another episode, and Miles, being the wordsmith that he is, was so intrigued by my John, he had to know more about the John. John is a slang term that originated in Philadelphia, at least mostly, and we'll get to that, and is used so much even in Philly's surrounding PA and New Jersey suburbs that it often appears in advertising. McDonald's even got down on that John with billboards featuring nothing but a sausage McMuffin and the words, "That's my John." Visit Philly.com's billboards read, "There's no John like home," and Vitamin Water plastered the area with billboards that said, "Vitamins, electrolytes, get that John." So, what is this John? Well, according to that Oxford Dictionary, John refers to a thing, place, person, or event that one need not or cannot give a specific name to. So basically, John can be used to replace absolutely any noun, anyone at all, in its singular or plural form. As an example, I might say, "What was that topwater John Mikey was throwing over at FDR Park for them largemouth John?" Or, upon seeing a giant flathead catfish swimming along the bank of the Schuylkill River, I might say, "Yo, that's the biggest John I ever seen in here." Followed by, "Yo, I'm retying my John with 50-pound because that 30-pound John ain't going to be strong enough if I hook that John." Interestingly, John can be pluralized with or without an S. Saying, "Let me get one of them Johns" when asking a buddy for a fresh minnow out of the bucket is acceptable. But more commonly, John is used to refer to multiple things minus the S. As an example, when asking a friend where he acquired multiple new striper plugs, you'd say, "Where'd you get them, John?" You might also say, "I want to get into fly fishing, but there's so much John to buy." Theories abound about John and where it came from. In fact, John is such an intriguing word because it can be used in so many ways that linguists have spent years studying this John and tracing its origins. All signs point to John being a derivative of joint. Joint, as a slang term, rose in popularity in the American South around the time of emancipation. Bars and clubs that served as safe havens for Black Americans were called juke joints. This eventually expanded into the labeling of somewhat sketchy places as joints, which even further down the line translated to any place you considered kind of underground, such as that little pizza joint or burger joint you think only you and your boys know about, even though that John is all over Yelp. But some smart John believed John was born in Philly in 1981 specifically. That year, hip-hop group Funky 4+1 had a popular song called That's the Joint. And it was one of the earliest recorded hip-hop tracks where the word joint was used as a positive term to refer to something good or something that you like. Linguists say because the singers slightly drew out the vowels in the word joint and didn't accentuate the T, Philadelphians either heard it as John or sang it as John, ultimately solidifying the future of that John. Take a listen.
What we just can't miss.
We just can't miss.
What we just can't miss.
With a beat like this.
It's the joint.
Did you hear it? Let's listen one more time.
So what's the deal? Sugar Hill. So what's the deal? Sugar Hill. Ooh,
that's the joint.
These first beats that we want y'all to hear. We gonna make a lot of sense.
Whether you heard joint or John, the mere mention of this song being the origin of John infuriates many Philadelphians. Why? Because Funky 4+1 was from the Bronx. And even though most linguists agree John technically came from joint, which got popularized as a catch-all in New York hip-hop culture, Philly people just don't want to hear that John. That John means too much to them. Now, if you're one of them John that gets all mad about John coming from them New York John, here's what I suggest. Head out to the garage and grab your John, and head down to that John where you caught all them John last season. Cast out a live John under a bobber, or maybe throw one of them Panther Martin Johns, and just relax. You got other John to worry about. No matter where that John came from, it's a Philly John now.
Quick follow-up. Do you think that Funky 4+1, that particular track, was ever on lip service?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, it would have been a death sentence. It would have been those 90s kids would have had no idea.
No idea.
And I think it's funny because that song is from that era in hip hop. You know, like when one track was 25 minutes long and like chronicled an entire week in somebody's life. You know, my alarm went off at 8 a.m. It was Tuesday. I was tired. So I hit the snooze button, and 8 minutes later, my alarm went off again. Or they just get on the thing that's like, we're going to rock this beat, we're going to rock this. And it would go on for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But I am, Sugar Hill. It's their style, no doubt.
Yep.
But I am curious, though, like listening to that, did you hear Joint or John?
Oh, okay. So the first clip, I heard Joint.
Mm-hmm.
But the second clip, I heard John.
Yeah.
So I think
it messes with you. Like you can hear it.
I think you can take that one either way, to be honest with you, because there are different parts of the song that you sampled there. And in the first one, it to me, it's clearly Joint. And the second one, I hear the John. But before we get too far away from it, I really did love everything about that weekly word. I felt like you completely crushed that one and took it in a direction I didn't think was going to go. And I very deeply enjoyed it.
It was a fun one, for sure.
Yeah. And it hit on a lot of levels for me personally. And you got me thinking, like as I was listening to that, you got me thinking about how influential that particular 1980 Funky 4+1 track was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then I started thinking about all of its different references in hip hop, right? You got this one from 89.
You heard the style, I think you missed the point. It's the joint.
Yeah, man. Beasties for the win on that one.
Fantastic track, fantastic album. If you don't know Paul's Boutique, you gotta. And then there's this other one, almost 10 years later. This one's from 98.
Yeah, that's the joint. That's the joint. That's the jam. Turn that shit up. Play it again. That's the joint.
Now, who's that? I don't know that.
Okay, that was Black Eyed Peas back when Black Eyed Peas did hip hop instead of pop. Back before Fergie was in it, and they were an actual legitimate hip hop trio.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
I could go on and on with this for a very long time, and we won't. I'll leave it at those two because I think they're good ones. But we've got our own little linguistics rap battle to deal with here. It's time for that fish news, John. Fish news.
escalated quickly.
All right, before we get in the news here, I got a shout out this week. Have to shout out listener Dustin Dugstad or Dugstad.
Yeah.
Again with the names, don't know, not really sure. But he sent us a video clip, right? And I know you've seen it.
I have. But before you get into it, though, the first time he sent it to us, there was no information, no context. It was just this really weird clip that I looked at and I went, I don't know what's happening here, but I want to know. Please tell me the story.
Well, now, So he came through with the follow-up, and now we know. And I've never seen anything like it, right? And it almost makes me question how badly I actually want to fish in New Zealand now. I've always sort of dreamed of it, and now I'm not so sure. So we'll do the short version because we got a lot to get through today. But in this clip, Dustin's fishing this trout river in New Zealand, and he had caught himself like a really nice big rainbow that he apparently decided he was going to take home for dinner. So he bonked the fish. But then what he does is he props his cell phone up on a rock so he can get a little selfie video of his big rainbow. And then he says while he was shooting that video, he realized the trout still had a little life left in it. So he moved off camera, he bonked it again, and then he reaches down to wash the slime and blood off his hands. Now remember, his camera is still rolling, propped on the rock. So it's like getting him in the corner of the frame. And all of a sudden, this giant, 3-4 foot eel latches onto his middle finger and he rips it out of the water, still holding onto his hand, and just flings this giant eel, just flings it. And his reaction is priceless. Okay. But he had said in the email after the fact, you don't see this, but while he's examining his bloody chewed up finger, he looks down and he notices there are 4 more of these giant eels at his feet, just poised and staring at him, ready to grab either a piece of trout meat or his hand, I guess. And I posted this on my Instagram earlier this week, but I'll drop it in my story again today. But it's creepy, and it leaves me clutching the hand a bit. Yeah. Because while I'm fascinated by eels, I don't love they creep me out when I catch them. Big congers, I don't like it. They're creepy. Them.
They're creepy. And I have fished that river that Dustin was on, actually, and I can attest to the fact that there are a lot of those freshwater eels swimming around in New Zealand waters. They're everywhere.
But you told me you don't catch them on flies, but any drop of blood, any chunk of meat,
I never fished bait, so right. I would imagine that if you fish bait, you get a lot of eels. But on artificials, I never had any eel action other than just seeing them around. They're everywhere, and they're definitely creepy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Super creepy video.
But Dustin, thank you for that, man. I got a I don't know if I'd say pleasure out of it, but it was fascinating to watch. And thank you for giving us the story so that we knew what the hell was going on, because that's one of those amazing moments you catch on camera that you can never recreate. Yep. All right. So as you all know, Fish News is a competition, and normally we have no idea what stories the other one's bringing, but it's a little different this week because Joe knows what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about something that we all know about here. But I don't know what Joe's going to talk about, so there's at least some mystery still involved. And at the end of it, our phenomenal and amazing audio engineer Phil is going to choose a winner and crown the champion of the week. And Joe, you're leading us off. So what do you got, man?
I am. I'm leading us off, and I'm sure some of you recall the news story I did just last week, I believe, about a woman in Malaysia eating her pet carp. Got a little traction on the interwebs, and she turned them into a nice soup. And in that report, we touched on how it's understood that many people in many cultures love eating carp, but by and large, we Americans don't. We don't eat the carp. In fact, in the culinary world, people would go as far as calling carp a 4-letter word, which has been a really massive problem when it comes to getting people to eat invasive Asian carp, right? And even though they're not the same species as common carp, they're not grubbing the bottom in the mud in the park pond. They feed differently, and they taste differently, and you and I can vouch for that, and we don't need to harp on it, but a piece of deep-fried Asian carp is delicious and mild and not fishy at all. I've eaten it at your house. We've talked about it before. Still, they're called carp, which sours a lot of people from having any interest in eating them. Well, per a recent story in USA Today, a full-on media blitz is coming later this year, okay, to change the consumer's perception of the fish and also, more importantly, change its name, okay? So now, this is from the article. The proposed new name for the fish is being kept tightly under wraps for a big rollout in June prior to the Boston Seafood Show in mid-July. But other aspects of what they're calling the Perfect Catch campaign will point out that invasive Asian carp species, being silvers, bigheads, grass carp, and black carp, are flaky, tasty, organic, sustainable, low in mercury, and rich in protein and omega-3 fatty acids. So what's happening here is the foodies are kind of pulling another fast one, right? And in case you didn't know, this has been done before. I'm sure many of you have heard of orange roughy, right? They're a deep-dwelling saltwater fish, but orange roughy is not their real name. Their technical name is slimehead. They're called slimeheads. And in the
who
late
wants
70s,
to eat that?
Nobody wants to eat a slimehead. But in the late 70s, a decision was made to rebrand those fish so people would buy and eat them. And they did. And the world ate so much orange roughy that in 2010, Greenpeace added them to their red list of unsustainable fisheries. I mean, the biggest ruse of them all is Chilean sea bass.
Yeah.
Their real name is Patagonian toothfish, but nobody's paying $80 for a plate of Patagonian toothfish at the country club, right? And but that name, point blank, was dreamed up by a seafood wholesaler in 1977 looking to increase his profits, and boy did he. And we don't have time to go into all the history and drama of commercial tooth fishing, but if you're interested, grab a copy of a book called Hooked, Pirates, Poaching, and the Perfect Fish by G. Bruce Knecht. I don't know if you've ever read that. It's a great
Several
book.
people after I talked about the toothfish last week and their blood being used to melt. Yeah. Several people melt snow. Several people wrote me and said I should read that book. I haven't read it, but it's one we might have to cover.
It's been a lot of years. I should reread it, but I remember it's a very, very good book, very detailed. Anyway, there's not much more to say about the carp story, right? Because it's all a big secret. Like they're unveiling the new name like it's like a New Year's Eve ball drop. Yet I fear that when it does finally light up, like there will just be the deflated sound of one party blower. You know, like the effect. Yeah, like the effect Phil uses in fish news. Phil, can you remind us? Thank you, Phil. But I hope it works. I really do. I'm just skeptical because people have tried this with dogfish, sea robins, skates, all kinds of things, like all these different efforts to get people really excited about eating them and buying them. And it really hasn't worked on a grand scale, but it does leave me speculating. How can you not? About those names.
Oh, that's the fun part about this.
Now, I do you have a couple in mind? Because I have a couple in mind.
Of course I do.
All right. Do you want to go first or second?
I mean, I only have one that I think is valid, and it's not really funny. I just think it would work. I think you just need to call it silver cod.
So, okay, interesting.
If you call anything cod, people are going to buy it, and they're going to eat the hell out of it.
I had a little bit more fun with it. And the way I look at it is it all depends on the branding, right? If you want it to be mostly consumed at state fairs as like fish and chips, deep fried, crispy brown, if that's sort of the motif we're going to get people excited about, I would say Kentucky cod was one of mine.
That's a good one.
Okay. But now if you want to glitz it up and make it fancy and have it in a raspberry reduction, I came up with Peorian hake or my favorite, Davenport sole.
Oh,
Davenport sole's pretty
That's clever.
good, dude.
That's clever. I like it.
You know, so we'll see what they rename the Asian carp up there in Boston this summer. But kidding aside, this is a fun little story. If you have the chance to consume some, whether you catch it or somebody offers you some, you'll be shocked. It is
don't
very,
say no.
very good.
Don't turn it down.
Don't say no.
I'm telling you.
Exactly.
It's really good. We've really done a good job, and I got to give you credit for most of this, but keeping this, it's been a fun, lighthearted episode so far. Everything's been kind of cheeky and enjoyable.
You're going to nosedive it.
I am going to completely ruin this vibe right now.
It's got to be done, though. It's got to be done. Got a lot of emails.
There's an elephant in the room that has to be discussed. And I'm only gonna do one story today because it's kind of long.
Yeah.
So last week, the state of Wisconsin's head sturgeon biologist, Ryan Koenig, was charged with obstruction in a case that alleges he and his staff illegally transferred lake sturgeon eggs to local caviar processors and then tried to cover it up.
Yep.
If you watched the sturgeon spearing episodes of the Fur Hat Ice Tour, you might remember the interview that Yanni did with Mr. Koenig. When we were putting that episode together, I talked with him a lot. Like, I'm not going to say we're buddies, but I definitely got to know him, and he really helped kind of shape that story and helped me understand, helped all of us understand the sturgeon fishery. So Koenig is, or I should say was, responsible for overseeing one of the largest, healthiest, and best managed sturgeon populations in North America, the Lake Winnebago system. The story of this fishery and the community tied to the lake sturgeon around there, it captivated everybody involved, right? And that's why we did 2 of our episodes there. We had to cover that. It was so good. And I don't want to get too repetitive for folks who already know, but I feel like this needs some backstory. Lake sturgeon, like all sturgeon, were pretty well wiped out by the turn of the 20th century. And in most places, they just haven't come back. In 19 of the 20 states where lake sturgeon once had viable populations, they remain either threatened or endangered. Lake Winnebago in Wisconsin is an outlier. It is the epicenter for sturgeon recovery. This is the success story that the rest of the country and other parts of the world are hoping they can emulate. And some of that can be attributed to the culture of sturgeon spearing, which would seem weird to some people, but those of us who work here in hunting and angling understand the relationship between sport and conservation. People around Winnebago really love spearing sturgeon. They really enjoy sitting over these giant holes cut in the ice, holding 6-foot-long tridents and waiting for massive fish to swim past them. Back in the late 1970s, a sturgeon spearer named Bill Casper noticed that there just weren't very many fish around.
Yeah.
And he figured that other spearers might be seeing the same thing. So he drove to all the bars around Lake Winnebago and tacked up these handmade flyers asking people to come to a meeting and talk about it. To his shock, over 300 people showed up. And the conservation group Sturgeon for Tomorrow was born. And that group, like, to me, that represents exactly what we mean when we talk about degenerate anglers.
Yeah.
Like going to a bar, tacking up flyers, and starting a conservation organization is exactly what I mean. Because that group has now grown into the largest citizen advocacy group for sturgeon in the world. They have partnered with management agencies and biologists from all over the U.S. and all the way to Europe. They were instrumental in jumpstarting and helping to fund sturgeon hatchery programs. They pioneered the Sturgeon Guard, which is like a bunch of volunteers who line the banks of the Wolf River every year to protect spawning sturgeon from poachers or people who just want to mess with them. Like they literally stand guard over these fish. And so often fish and wildlife recovery efforts result in conflict between management agencies and local residents. But in this case, spearers and anglers have been able to work in concert with the Wisconsin DNR, and the results have been phenomenal. Here's Koenig.
This population's had a chance with the protections that have been in place for the last few decades that we're starting to see what these fish can actually do. We've got more fish than we've probably had in recent decades, maybe even dating back to the late 1800s, and we've got more big fish than we maybe ever have had.
All that's to say, Lake Winnebago sturgeon are a rare and unequivocal success story in modern fisheries conservation. They're in such good shape that the Wisconsin DNR can confidently open up a spearing season every year, and tens of thousands of people buy tags.
Yeah.
Sturgeon biologists set annual quota, and the DNR operates registration stations at all the major lake access points so that they can closely monitor fish harvest. As soon as that quota is met, which doesn't happen every year, the season closes immediately. Right? They're on it. So techs and biologists collect samples and data from each fish harvested, like length, weight, sex, stomach contents, and sexual maturity, which provide critical information for continuing to monitor and manage the fish. So this is a very complex and really well-organized event that gets tens of thousands of people fired up about lake sturgeon and also helps the DNR collect all kinds of useful data.
Mm-hmm.
But the 2021 spearing season, which opened last Saturday, began with a kind of a dark cloud over it. Koenig, the biologist who has successfully overseen the Winnebago sturgeon season since 2012, has been placed on administrative leave. He's also facing up to $10,000 in fines and up to 9 months in jail if convicted. And he's not alone. Several other pillars of the sturgeon culture around Lake Winnebago are also facing possible charges. So what happened? Wisconsin DNR has compiled evidence suggesting that Koenig and other staff have been supplying roe to local caviar processors for years. When a successful spearer brought a sexually mature female to a registration station, the biologists and techs would sometimes collect the eggs as part of an ongoing fertility study. Koenig told investigators that he delivered eggs to specific caviar processors at the spearer's request after completing his analysis. Koenig also told investigators he handed out sheets at sturgeon registration stations that listed certain processors' names and contact info, so spearers knew where to deliver eggs if they wanted them processed into caviar. Now, if that were just the complete truth, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Sure. Yeah.
But Koenig and others have been under investigation since 2017, and the criminal complaint alleges more nefarious goings-on, shall we say.
Right.
Investigators claim that DNR staff stored sturgeon eggs at registration stations with the sole intent of giving them to processors. They even found one cooler containing eggs marked with the name of a local processor. The complaint does not, however, cite any known sales of caviar or make any claims that anyone from DNR or elsewhere received payments for eggs. The problem is that there are numerous reports indicating that Koenig and other DNR employees received jars of caviar as thanks. As soon as Koenig and others accepted gifts, those sturgeon eggs were no longer given away, they were bartered. And bartering with wildlife products is unequivocally against the law, and to be honest, for really good reason. Koenig is being charged with obstruction because it appears he tried to cover up his involvement. The statements he made to investigators did not match some of the evidence they collected. Additionally, he performed a factory reset on his DNR-issued cell phone after he became aware of the investigation.
Oh, yeah.
3 other residents were charged with unlawful sale of game in connection to this case, including Victor and Mary Schneider. Again, if you watch the Fur Hat Ice Tour, you're probably going to recognize Mary Schneider's name. She's the 87-year-old decoy carver and just matriarch of sturgeon culture around Fond du Lac.
I like the paint. I like the carved wood. I've been doing it for years.
Mary told investigators that she and her husband process eggs dropped off by successful spearers in exchange for half the finished product. There's no evidence that the Schneiders sold any of the caviar. They either ate it or gave it away to friends and family. But under the law, that's still a form of barter. I do not condone bartering or selling wildlife in any form. Doing so cants towards a slippery slope that can lead to the commodification of wild fish and animals. But man, I got to admit, the story really leaves me conflicted.
Yep.
Several retired state employees said on the record that it wasn't unusual for DNR staff to share the prepared caviar they got from the processors at meetings or local taverns as a way of encouraging people to maximize the use of the fish they harvested. They considered the samples educational. And I can imagine that the folks working those sturgeon spearing season,
yeah,
like they see a lot of fish, and a lot of fish eggs go to waste every year.
Yeah.
And I can imagine how frustrating that's got to be. And so I can understand why they would want to encourage more spearers to eat eggs by showing them like, hey, this stuff can be made into a delicacy. It can be really good. Don't waste it. I also know how in a small town, people often operate on a barter system, right? Like they help each other out and they return favors in whatever ways they can. But I think this case is a very sad and very high profile reminder to all of us that we can't use wildlife or fish meat or wild game as currency. Even in a situation where it seems completely innocent and innocuous. Like if somebody's helped me, I don't know, sand and repaint my deck, the law says I can't thank them with walleye fillets and deer steaks from my freezer. And I'm sure that there are some people out there that are saying that it's crazy and this is a total overreach of enforcement. But the commodification of wildlife has had disastrous outcomes in the past. We've seen what happens. So we have these really strict laws for a reason. And for those of you out here who want to know more about this, head on over to themeateater.com and check out Pat Durkin's article titled Wisconsin's Top Sturgeon Biologist Charged in Caviar Probe.
I totally agree with the slippery slope here, but just to maybe try and have a better understanding, or to clarify here. So like what you're talking about with somebody sanding your deck and you thanking them with walleye fillets or deer meat from your freezer.
Yep.
That you're not supposed to do because now technically that has become a form of payment, basically.
Correct.
Now that's barter. If those same two dudes came over and helped you with nothing, and as a gift, you were like, hey man, you want to take some walleye home or some venison home? That's okay.
It is. Yes. You can gift. It's different state by state, but sometimes you have to have paperwork associated with it to say like, this has been gifted, but often after it's processed, you don't have to do that. If it were a whole animal that I had harvested under my tag and I wanted to gift it to somebody, there'd be a bunch of paperwork you have to do to make it legal. But you can gift things. They just cannot become a form of currency. That's
Right.
where things become a problem. You cannot begin to use any wildlife products as currency of any sort by law. And again, look, I get why it seems potentially crazy. How could you be upset at this 87-year-old woman who's is making caviar for somebody, and she gets half of it that she gives to her friends and family? That is something I very much can identify with and understand that sense of frustration. But I also think it's important to recognize that we have these game laws for a reason, and they're really strict for a reason.
Of course.
I genuinely hope and I expect that the Schneiders get let off. Like, I will be pretty upset if they actually get prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
Sure.
I it's not my call, it's not my place, but if anyone were to ask me, I'd say, I mean, come on. You made your point. Everybody understands, like, let's not actually prosecute these old people.
Sure.
Koenig is a different story.
Yep.
Like, I think he probably did have good intentions. I really do. But it's the lying and the cover up instead of just coming clean. And that, for me, that's where he crossed the line.
That's what bites a lot of people on a lot of things, man. If you had just been open about it, you might not be in the same pickle. And to that end, so both of us, I mean, we got lit up since this dropped. Like, wasn't that the guy in fur hat? Wasn't that, you guys worked with him? And sort of unrelated to the central story too. This happens from time to time. It has happened to me. There have been several times over the years where you shoot a video or write an article or quote somebody, and you do the best you can to vet people, and you certainly don't know everything about it. But then it comes out later, like, that dude got hit for poaching crappies, and like you crappie fished with him 3 years ago. It happens on occasion, like it's terrible. But I've had it happen with dudes who, had these incredible careers on the up and up, and then, something happens, and then it comes back on you like, you were fishing with that shithead. It's like, yeah, man, but you don't know that. You know what I mean? Like this stuff just unfortunately happens time to time.
And, there's also you can't throw out or discount the excellent work that this person has done previously in his career. That doesn't mean that you condone the aspects that were illegal or unethical, but you can't just discount and throw away the great work that he has done to help manage the sturgeon population and maintain the relationships of the community with the sturgeon. Like, the dude deserves the credit for what he did, and he's certainly getting the punishment for the things he did wrong as well.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, as shady as this is, he made some wrong choices in this, but you're right. You can't let this wipe away and define every single thing that this guy has done in his career.
No, I don't think so. And I think ultimately the real loser in all of this is going to end up being the sturgeon population, right? I think
yes,
that you've lost the person who was heading that up. You've lost some of the infrastructure that's worked to do this really well for the past 9 years. And I'm sure that Wisconsin DNR is going to get it back together and get things up and running. It's all going to be fine. But, losing the folks who've been intimately involved in this program and done well with it for almost a decade is certainly going to be a hiccup. I don't think this has a happy ending. And I just hope that, I think if there's a takeaway for me, it's to remember like that, how easy it is to run afoul when it comes to gifting or bartering with fish and wildlife, and that we all have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why those laws exist. There's no reason to be pissed off about it. Just be careful what you do.
And it's the simplest things that can get you in a lot of trouble.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
All right, so that one we had to get that one out of the way. I got one more short one here, although it all does kind of tie together. We've eaten Asian carp and caviar now, 2 very controversial dishes, apparently. So, well, we'll try and move away to something a little more safe and familiar. Because we all love a nice golden, crispy fried piece of walleye. Right, especially
it is the American fish.
It's the American fish, which is what makes this interesting. We especially love that out of a frigid lake in the middle of winter. It's good eats. Anyway, Minnesota-based Blue Water Farms, which is an aquaculture company, believes they're going to be the first to successfully raise mass quantities of eater-sized walleyes indoors. Walleye farming. Now,
indoors.
So now here's the thing, right? We could spend another hour digging into the backstory of walleye farming and commercial walleye fishing, but there's just a couple key bullet points here that will help paint a better picture of why this is a big deal. There is no commercial walleye fishing in the U.S. anymore, right? But there is in Canada. Right. So while you don't see walleye for sale in the States as frequently as you did, many, many years ago, if you do see it at a fish fry joint in a restaurant on the Great Lakes or whatever, it was probably harvested in Canada and then sold
with
back
a couple
to us.
exceptions. I gotta, because otherwise you're going to get hammered. There are a couple tribal nations who still do commercial fish for walleye in the U.S. But mostly it's gone. But I know I can see with our listeners that you were going to
fair. No,
you were
I
going to hear
appreciate
about
it.
that.
I appreciate it. There's a lot of research in this, and I was not great in school. So the other bullet point here, we know walleyes can successfully be raised in hatcheries. Many states do this for stocking purposes. However, they're typically released into the wild around 20 centimeters because once they reach that length, they're sort of off of plankton and microinvertebrates, and they're eating each other. So basically, walleyes can't really be raised to market size, or one of the difficulties, to a size you'd get nice fillets off of because they're just too damn mean and cannibalistic. That's been one of the biggest hang-ups in walleye farming. And that's just one of many problems that have been encountered over the years. Now, in doing some research, there have been some advances, right? There was one dude who figured it out in floating pens, but, he was supplying local establishments, but his walleye were so much more expensive than the ones being imported from Canada that it just didn't make any sense. He kind of got knocked out of the market. Anyway, according to this story in the Duluth News Tribune, Blue Water Farms thinks they've got it figured out. And to be clear, this walleye rearing facility doesn't exist yet. They're still in the funding phase and grants phase, planning phase, but it is chugging along. And the company has actually hired a gent named Gregory Fisher, who was kind of the top dog at the aquaculture facility at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And according to this story, he has essentially figured out how to rear market-sized walleyes in an indoor recirculating aquaculture system. His team has proven that it can be done with brood stock. And I get the impression that there's some trade secret here. Like, there's a lot of details about the specifics of how he's figured that out left out of the story. However, the thing to keep in mind is proving it's feasible is not the same as scaling it up to a point where it's economical. Right. So to make it economical, you've got to produce loads and loads of walleye so that you make the cost of goods to restaurants and markets comparable to buying, imported wild-caught walleye or wherever else you get it. And Blue Water is confident that they'll get there, but it's really yet to be seen. And I think one of the interesting things about this is, you called it America's fish. It's easy to forget how many people have never had delicious walleye, because in a lot of cases, if you're not an angler catching your own, it's not something that you get your hands on very easily. But so many anglers target them, and you and I tend to run with fishy people. We're fishy people listening now, that you sort of forget that. And it's very similar to striped bass on the East Coast. It's not easy to find legally harvested, saltwater pure strain striper on a menu or in a fish market. So many people have never tasted that, but because I've fished for them my whole life, it's not weird. And I'd be curious to see if walleye anglers think, if this happens, if blue water can achieve this, if the fish is as good, because it's common. The common non-angling consumer won't really know the difference, but even here, you can buy what's labeled as striped bass in a fish market, but it's sneaky wordplay because it's hybrid farm-raised striper, guarantee side by side with the real deal. It's not as good, but very curious to see
fish
where
is
this
never
goes.
the same. It
Exactly.
just isn't.
Exactly. And this whole operation, if you're unfamiliar with aquaculture, it's a circulating system, so they'll be growing walleyes to market size, but also year-round growing lettuce and strawberries and all kinds of other things with the wastewater that filters through and grows vegetables. It could be pretty revolutionary if they can get it done, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say cautiously optimistic with the limited information I have. This is not a useful comment, but you're in Minnesota. Why would you name yourselves Blue Water? Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know of any blue water in Minnesota, but anyway, maybe it sounds good if you're in the fish farming game. Blue water.
Well, yeah, and time will tell if it works. But if you think about it, while there's still commercial fishing on the Canadian side of like the Great Lakes and things like that, I mean, the fact that it's not really happening on a grand scale on our side anymore really speaks to why we have such incredible walleye fisheries in the Great Lakes. So there's plenty out there to be caught for you to take home and cook up. But if we were commercially fishing for them, to get the amount that we needed to supply restaurants and things, the walleye fishing wouldn't be nearly as good on this side. So this does have value in terms of sustainable fisheries, and maybe there'll be a lot more walleyes down the road in fish markets. We shall see. You are definitely still eligible for a win for your reporting. Phil still has to pick somebody. And I think after this round of news, I could certainly use a stiff drink to wash all this info down. So we'll hear from Phil, and then we'll do a little That's My Bar.
Miles, you fell on the caviar grenade this week so that Joe Cermelli could be crowned the winner, and I'm sure he appreciates it. This whole Asian carp rebranding thing is all very amusing to me. Like it's Ali Sheedy in The Breakfast Club or Olivia Newton-John in Grease. The carp will take off its glasses and let its hair down, and we'll realize that it was hot the whole time. But as far as a rebranding goes, this feels less like Ziggy Stardust and more like Chris Gaines. People say you stink, you Garth Brooks fish you, but I see you. And you know what? I love you just the way you are.
Best goddamn bartender from Timbuktu to Portland, Maine. Or Portland, Oregon, for that matter.
Okay, we've got a dandy of a That's My Bar submission for you guys, courtesy of Brad Schuster. I hope I said that right. And Brad, let me tell you what, man, I love when a part of what makes a bar great is a character at that bar. Like, I love the cheersy aspect of this entry. And today we are going to Leona, Wisconsin. The Wisconsin people are probably going to tell me I said that wrong too, but give me a break.
It's going to happen.
Right? It's going to happen. We're going there to Johnny's Resort on the shore of Wabacon Lake. I'm sure I said that wrong too. Just send me a note. It's fine. Anyway, Brad writes, opened in 1947 by John Sr. and still run today by his son, Johnny Muskie Aschenbrenner. Johnny's Resort stands in a category all by itself when it comes to fishing bars. You can pop into the resort in the morning, rent a boat with a full tank of gas for only $50, and head out for a full day of muskie fishing on some of the best water Northeast Wisconsin has to offer. When your day is done, you're going to want to stop in for what is easily the best and only frozen pizza on the lake. And be sure to get your name up on the wall of honor if you were successful in catching a muskie. Johnny keeps a record of all muskies over 32 inches caught in a year. That is rad. But I just need to stop for 1 second. I just got to comment and say, in my East Side world, the words best and frozen do not belong in the same sentence when discussing pizza. Like even the dives here, they make their own. Sometimes it sucks, but they make their own. But I do understand the frozen bar pie is such a Midwest thing. And even me, like the pizza snot that I am, will admit that if I had to classify the finest frozen pizzas I've ever had, the finest on the market, they would be Hedgie's, which is from Minnesota, and Jack's, which is, in fact, from Wisconsin.
I appreciate that clarification and that you were willing to go there, but I got to say, the whole Northeast pizza thing is overrated. It is. Maybe, all right, 30 years ago, right? Maybe 30 years ago when the rest of the country just had Pizza Hut and Domino's, there was a legitimate argument that, only get good pizza in the Northeast. But now you can get good pizza pretty much anywhere. And I say this having eaten at both Grimaldi's and Juliana's in Brooklyn. They're both very good, but are they the end-all, be-all of pizza? No, I do not think so.
I mean, that's fine. You're trying to get me to engage here, but I find that sometimes it's just easier to let people that don't know what they're talking about just have their moment. Like, we don't have the time. If I wanted to take a shot, though, I'd say, Grimaldi's and Juliana's. Someone watches a lot of that Food Paradise show and is a tourist. The real Brooklyn people are not at either of those places. They're at the real joint. Anyway, enough about that.
Fair enough. I'm wading into water that's deeper than my waders right now. Back to Brad, who really is the focus of this.
It's your moment, Brad, not ours.
Yeah, we're being jerks. Brad says in his email, be sure to visit with Johnny. Ask him to tell you some tales of his youth growing up on the lake. Ask to see his dad's old muskie gun. How else would you dispatch a muskie before bringing it in the boat? Or maybe ask to see the bucktails Johnny tied with his own beard hair. And certainly spend some time looking out over the collection of lures and mounts from a different era of muskie fishing. Above all else, you must celebrate a successful day muskie fishing or drown a shitty one with the bar's signature drink, the Kraut Bomb.
The Kraut Bomb.
Yeah, and that's not racist. It's not racist. You'll hear why in a second.
No. We are talking sauerkraut. So ready for this? Because here's how you make it, right? Brad says, in a bomb cup, the plastic cups with a shot glass in the middle surrounded by a second larger cup, fill the shot glass with Jaeger. Then fill the outside with, and this next part is very important, he says, warm Frank's sauerkraut juice opened with a rusty can opener. He says, Johnny himself poured me one to celebrate my first fly rod muskie, and I can say from the experience they are just as delicious as they sound. And I guess, Brad, if I stuck my first fly rod muskie there, and it was a good one, like over 40, not a little tweezer, I'd slam that, but it really sounds awful. Like it sounds terrible. Plus, I'm gonna just go ahead and say my Jaeger days are kind of over, and my SoCo days are even further behind me, I think, than my Jaeger days.
Smart choices.
I don't know, man. Like the kraut juice itself, that doesn't turn me off. Like I could see adding maybe a spritz of that to a Bloody or a Caesar, but kraut juice and Jaeger in my head, that's like fish sauce on Starburst or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds pretty terrible, and I'm gonna agree. It's not the kraut juice. It's the Jaeger. But though the drink sounds awful, the bar does not. If I got a drink, if I am absolutely forced to drink a round of kraut bombs to get Johnny started telling muskie stories, that is one bomb I'll fall on.
Agreed.
I'll throw myself on that one. And beard bucktails, muskie guns, vintage mounts. Come on, I'm in. I'm freaking in on all that.
Me too. We're there together.
I checked out Johnny's website, and it's Spartan at best, and it doesn't appear to have been updated since 2011. But it does seem to confirm the legitimacy of this magical place. So Brad is not just putting us on with some elaborate fantasy.
That's good to hear. Do not play with our emotions like that. But if you have a magical place that serves liquor you'd like to hear called out on the show, much like Brad, please write down a compelling story and send it to us at bent@themeateater.com.
I loved that one. It left me wanting on some details because I want to know more about the muskie gun.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, was it a 22? I have questions. There are lingering questions.
So do I, man. I know. Yeah, exactly. Was it a pistol? A shotgun? I don't know, man. In the old school shark fishing scene, at least out here, most guys did not rely on a pistol, because you had to be too accurate and too much could go wrong, like shooting a hole in the boat. So the old heads around here, they often went with the single shot 410.
She stepped into the alley with a single shot 410. The road goes on forever and the party never ends.
The hell was that?
That was my fault. That was my fault.
I did not authorize the sticking in of that. What was that?
That was, my friends, I hope you noticed, that was Robert Earl Keen, and I had to get one more song reference in this episode. We were on a roll. Anyway, it sounds like Back to the Bar. Johnny's is as much a museum as it is actually a bar or resort. And they might even have one particular classic lure hanging on the wall there that's been on my mind lately. In this week's End of the Line, I'm taking a deep dive into a lure that somehow escaped both Joe and me for most of our lives, despite it being influential, groundbreaking, and catching lots of big bass. So ride along with me as I give props to the devil.
Fishy, 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 fishy! Oh, that's not loud enough, Bert.
I know Joe covered a classic propeller bait just a few weeks ago when he talked about getting all pukey in the Amazon pulling wood choppers for peacocks, but I feel like I need to revisit this genre. The main reason comes from listener Ryan Bromberger, who runs the website Access the Wild and recently sent us a care package that included a couple vintage lures from his great-grandfather's tackle box. Now, I don't actually know what compelled Ryan to send such family riches to a couple degenerates like us, but I am deeply grateful and humbled. One of the lures that Ryan sent along is a long, cylindrical, wooden hardbait with propellers in the fore and the aft, superficially similar to the wood chopper Joe described, as well as a whole bunch of other prop baits that have been sold over the years. But as I have come to learn, this one's different. This lure has captivated me ever since it arrived at my house, and I've spent way too much time digging into the backstory. To be totally honest, I'd never heard of this lure, and neither had Joe. At first glance, I just thought it was one of many short-lived baits from the late 20th century, something produced for a couple years that never took off. But I was wrong. It's called a devil's horse, spelled D-E-V-E-L, for reasons I'll explain in a minute, and it was manufactured by the Smithwick Lure Company. Smithwick is probably best known for their Rogue jerkbaits, which Joe covered in an early episode of the show, but though the Rogue may be the bait that is best known, it wasn't the lure that launched the company, or even their most groundbreaking design. That was the devil's horse. Jack K. Smithwick was an office supplies salesman in post-World War II Shreveport, Louisiana, which might sound like a bland dead-end job, but it gave Smithwick access to the heads of some of the largest companies in the South. In the early 1940s, he started carving lures out of broom handles, much to the irritation of his wife, supposedly, who started hiding her brooms. In 1946, Smithwick designed and fished the first prototypes of what would later become the devil's horse. A couple years later, once he knew he was onto something, he started giving out sample lures to his biggest clients. At that time, just about every serious businessman in the South fished for bass. Pretty soon, those clients were calling him for more than just office supplies. They wanted lures and were willing to pay for them. In 1949, he quit the office supplies business, bought a lathe from Sears, hired some help, and started making lures full-time from his home. Even after going in full-time and producing 30,000 devil's horses in the first year, demand vastly outstripped his production capacity, which gave the lures an even greater appeal. For the first decade, the baits were something of a regional secret, popular in Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, and Florida. And at that time, they were branded with the word devil. Like I said, misspelled with 2 E's. Most sources claim that misspelling to have been intentional, a marketing decision made due to concern that buyers wouldn't purchase a lure with the word devil on it during those more pious times. But in an interview with the writer Michael Bacon, Smithwick's son Jack Jr. claimed, "Hell, Dad just couldn't spell." Either way, in 1963, the bait was officially renamed the Devil's Horse, with an I, just as the Smithwick brand began to gain national traction. By then, they had a whole line of Devil's Horse-style stickbait offshoots in different sizes, weights, and body shapes. Throughout the 60s, outdoor writers penned tales of riding the devil's horse and catching bass all over the country. In 1969, Smithwick released the Rogue jerkbait, and that seems to have been the turning point when the devil's horse began to fade in the background. A couple years later, Smithwick started making rubber worms, spinners, weights, and crankbaits, and somewhere in this period, the company seems to have stopped riding the horse that brung them. Though the devil's horse never went out of production, it faded into the background, at least in certain parts of the country, which is probably why Joe and I, a couple lifelong anglers who came of age in the 80s and 90s in the Northeast and West, had never heard of this bait. But that's not the end of the story. Just because Joe and I weren't hip to the horse doesn't mean that other people stopped fishing them or that they stopped catching fish. Solid chance that any southern bass heads listening to this are hollering at their phones or radios right now and calling me a complete moron, because across those same states where the horse first gained popularity, it never really fell out of fashion. It has quietly remained a staple topwater lure for big bass in shallow water, even among some of the top pros. Unlike the woodchopper and other prop baits, the horse supposedly shines brightest when fished slowly in close proximity to weedy cover, instead of retrieving it with aggressive rips and jerks like Joe described with the woodchopper, or burning it on the top like a buzzbait. Folks in the know fish the horse as a finesse lure, casting it tight to cover, letting it sit for several seconds, and working it painfully slow. Short twitches, followed by long pauses. And here's where I feel like the story of the horse really comes full circle. If you're deep in the bass fishing scene, you've probably heard about spy baiting or spin baiting, a technical finesse presentation for highly pressured finicky bass developed in Japan in the mid-2000s. It became the hot new thing in the hardcore bass world about a decade ago. Spy baits are long cylindrical baitfish-shaped lures with propellers in the front and the aft. Sound familiar? Yeah, just like the devil's horse. But hold up. Spy baits sink, and the devil's horse is known as a topwater. Except the original horse was actually a subsurface lure, and Smithwick continued to produce various sinking models for many years after. Unfortunately, spy baiting wasn't a thing back then. And because the topwater models outsold the subsurface versions, the original design eventually fell out of production. The only horses made today are floaters, and that's kind of a shame. Smithwick was actually designing and fishing the hottest new lure for the smartest, most technical bass. He just did it about 60 years too early.
So that's all the time we have this week. And what you've just experienced was the true story.
The true story.
Of two complete fish bums.
Picked to live in a podcast.
And have their bullshit taped.
To find out what happens when a salty girl from the vineyard, a washed-up bike messenger, and a guy whose dad used to throw lead at muskie heads stop being polite
and start getting real serious about reminding you to please keep those comments, questions, concerns, bar nominations, sale bin items, awkward photos, and all that, John, coming to bent@themeateater.com.
We love hearing from all of you. And don't forget, we've always got eyes on those Degenerate Angler and Bent Podcast hashtags. Make us laugh, cry, or barf with your posts, and we might send a sticker pack at you.
Yeah, and if you're struggling to figure out what to say to us when you email or post, just ask yourself.
How do you talk to an angel? It's like trying to catch a falling star.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.